Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn. In my annual forecast for this year in 2025, the tagline I gave to this year was the point of no return. And we're only not even 2 months into 2025, and it's becoming clearer to the collective that we are in a systemic crisis in many different ways. And on all levels, we're being challenged to seek solutions. And at this stage, there's still many people looking for the external saviour. The external saviour is a myth, and it's becoming obvious now there is a splitting in the bifurcation process that's occurring again, with many people who appear to be on the path of awakening who are still stagnant in the sense that they're looking for some sort of saviour. And this can be reflected in many different ways, whether it's a saviour in a guru or a political figure or some kind of white knight. And this isn't the path that we're on for the true path of awakening. And this Piscean way of looking at things, this Piscean age, is characterized by the verb for the Pisces, I believe, which is a faith-based doctrine, which has been very supportive of global religions and so on through this age of Pisces. But this Piscean age is now ending gradually. It's a very slow process. Precession is a very slow process, but as the age of Aquarius starts to get momentum, we're moving into a more direct connection to the absolute, the infinite, whatever the universe, the creator, whatever name you want to give to it. And this is reflected in the verb for the Aquarius, I know. So obviously this precession moves backwards, but this is a direct connection rather than an intermediary, like a middle person or something like this. And there is still a lot of people who are waiting for some sort of messianic figure in a certain way to save us. And this is really something that we need to mature into to understand that no one's coming to save us, and we need to learn to become our own saviours. And this really coincides with the Hopi prophecy and the statement that we're the ones that we've been waiting for. And so because of this, I have taken the initiative this year to begin a series of workshops called Navigating the Shift. This will be at my home here on the Sunshine Coast in the hinterland. And these are in-person workshops, one-day workshops, and we will be looking at a whole range of different topics in a very holistic way to help create states of empowerment, because we're still seeing that many people are projecting their own anger, their own fear into this narrative of the awakening, which is still very limited in the sense that it's really focused on geopolitics, the power structure, the elite, these sorts of topics. And they're not really coming back home. And we are collectively still in the early stages where we haven't done enough inner work collectively to really start to get the momentum to focus on what we're creating. So for this reason, much of the rhetoric in the awakening community is very much reactive. It's really focusing on only one half of the equation. It's not focusing on the second half, which is, well, what's my place in this, and what's my responsibility in this, and how do I need to answer this call, and how do I embark on the hero's journey, and how do I do the inner work to be the best version of myself, and how do I ultimately embark on this evolutionary pathway. So this systemic crisis that we're in, we are still collectively at the stage where we're trying to basically substitute one system for another without actually there being any genuine blossoming of consciousness. And this just means that ultimately one dysfunctional system will be replaced with another dysfunctional system. And I discussed this in my book, and the best analogy I actually found for this was George Orwell's Animal Farm. If you haven't read it, it's a really must read. And it's an analogy or a metaphor for the Russian Revolution and the early reign of Stalin. And basically, without spoilers if you haven't read it, but basically the pigs or the animals challenge the farmer, and the farmer is the czar, and they replace their own power structure and ways of doing things with the animal way. And the narrative changes gradually, and such phrases as all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, with the pigs taking the hierarchy in their own power structure on the farm. And the last sentence, which I'll read now, really sums up that lack of transformation or replacing one system with another. The creatures outside look from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which is which. And that's the last sentence of the book, and that really sums up where we are at the moment, without doing enough inner work and replacing corrupt structures, or however you want to perceive it, with benevolent, good leaders and good systems and so on that serve humanity collectively. And so this is really something that we should really reflect on, because very often there's a projection with this limited way of looking at things, that people are thinking, wow, I'm awake because I understand what's happening in the power structure, for example, and the systemic crisis. But what about how we relate to that emotionally, how we relate to that psychologically, how we relate to that spiritually? Because otherwise it's just a projection for our own anger, our own frustration, our own fear. And the more that we can heal and raise our consciousness above that, the less we're influenced by this tumultuous turmoil, which is, at least here in Australia, it really appears to me to be gaining momentum day by day. And this is also amplified by the fact that we've got a federal election coming up here, which will be probably announced in the next couple of weeks, but it'll definitely going to be in May at the latest. So there is a intensification of the focus there as to what our way forward is. And at least for here in Australia, we can't go back. We're not going back to the golden era of the 60s, 70s and 80s, maybe of the 90s, depending how you want to define it. But our role in this process is to transform spiritually, to awaken our divinity. And we've lost our contact with that collectively. I mean, this is the pitfall of living in Kali Yuga. It's very difficult to sustain truly higher states day-to-day life, because the forces of nature are working against this. But this is the challenge. And at the same time, the universe is supporting us now with the change in the subtle reality. But our role is to discover what the subtle reality is, to discover the subtle reality within, to start to perceive chakras, to perceive the ability to connect with the subtle astral body, mental body, and so on, and to awaken Kundalini Shakti. And this conversation will ultimately become broader in this subculture, if you want to call it that. But the time of connecting to just what I refer to as pseudo-spirituality, which is just this mishmash of techniques that really don't produce the fruits that people are looking for, or the spiritual bypassing of the new age, well, there is an urgency now to really start to integrate the waves of the subtle energy as it's changing, and to integrate this and embody these frequencies, because it is something of a frequency shift that's occurring, if you want to define it as that. And we need to move with the evolutionary times, and there's really no getting around that. And many people are confused in this way. There is this great confusion. But the more that we can center ourselves and learn to trust our own inner strength, our own inner power, our own inner divinity, we will actually ultimately navigate the shift with ease and grace. And it's my hope that more of this conversation is becoming more prominent in the themes of the awakening, instead of just the latest the latest loosh harvesting thing where people are just dragged emotionally, psychologically from topic to topic, and it's intensifying. And this is why I labeled in my forecast 2024 as the year of convergence. And specifically, I said that convergence wouldn't end in 2024. In many ways, it's only just beginning. It's like a cake with different layers, adding to it, adding to it. And if we do not find our center and our balance within, then we actually are distracted from what's most important. And this is going to take away our focus from developing this soul power. And this phrase that I really love, soul power, is to tap into this infinite power of the soul. And this is what the workshop ultimately is going to be focusing on, this series of workshops. And we all have this potential, but we do need the right techniques, we need the right tools, we need the right mindset, and we need the right esoteric knowledge. And in regard to much of the classical what I refer to as classical spirituality, too much of the conversation is really just in this abstract metaphysical tone without any relation to the times that we're living through and the need to really go within and how that relates to what's occurring externally. I mean, it's going to be very difficult just following some, out of touch guru who's just, quoting texts from phrases from Sanskrit texts and so on without really addressing the terrain, the terrain of what we're confronted with day by day. And further to that, what we're seeing in the events at the start of the decade, where so many people were blindsided by propaganda and hysteria and collective hypnosis, is that the more elevated your consciousness is, the more lucid you are. You at least need some of your consciousness in Manipura chakra to separate from the confusion of the hive mind. That's a minimum to begin this journey. And of course, the heart chakra is obviously key in the whole shift. But to develop this discernment, this lucidity, this perception through Ajna chakra, this is like a kind of gateway to discernment, to truth ultimately, and from that the light. But if we're just lost in the doom scrolling and the endless social media, loosh, then it's detracting from our perception from what's most important. And so the more we can develop this ability, the more we can awaken it. And we need a framework for this. It just won't happen by itself. I mean, some people will ultimately have the grace of the universe, definitely. But for most of us, we are charged with this responsibility now to seek out the correct information, to question what we're being taught, our belief systems. I'm talking about our spiritual belief systems here. And to really look at the ways that we are disempowered or we are projecting in order to actually create states of deep spiritual empowerment, particularly at the level of the soul. And this is why this phrase soul power is really the key to it. I mean, how do we awaken the soul? How do we charge ourselves with this energy, with this ability that we all have the potential to, but it needs effort and it needs an impetus, and the impetus ultimately comes from within. You cannot really awaken anyone up. I mean, and the thing is that these spiritual tests that we're all facing, regardless of how much meditation we do a day and how much yogic practice or pranayama or kundalini yoga, whatever it is you're doing, is that when these tests come, the more lucid we are, is the more preparation that we have. And so we can see through the fog of confusion. We can see through the deception. And ultimately, we can discern good from evil, which has been probably the greatest failing of humanity in this decade so far, is that so few people have actually been able to discern good from evil. And this obviously has been a great concern for many people on the journey of awakening, and has mystified a lot of people. But this is a frequency, an individual frequency. So the more we can, in this confused collective state, actually separate ourselves. This is a verticality in terms of evolution, in terms of the chakras, in terms of Kundalini Shakti. That, and I'll be teaching the techniques and principles of that at these workshops. The first one is in February 22nd. And I discuss many of these principles in my book that I've written as well. Paradigm Shift 2020 to 2040, The Great Awakening of Humanity. The more that the tests are easier to pass because we've done the preparation. It's like exactly the same as you're training for a sport. And the more you practice, the more you prepare. When the match comes around, the opposition is the opposition is no match for you. And so in this way, by purifying our being, by awakening our being, we see good from evil. We see the light from the dark, and we are able to have this inner knowing, and it's unshakable. And I know many people watching this video understand exactly what I'm referring to, but it's unshakable. And there's a huge power in this. There's a huge personal power. It's not necessarily make things easy, but there's a huge personal power. And from this strength comes more strength. From soul power comes more soul power. And from this awakening of this divinity comes increased divinity. And this is a path to salvation, however you want to refer to it, whatever path. It's one mountain. There's just many different paths to the top of the mountain. But we need to have the courage and strength to walk this path. And also the awareness and perception that we are now heading towards this end game, which my premise in my book is it is unfolding in the next basically 15 years. I wouldn't necessarily say in the middle of it, we're not at the beginning of it, we're not at the end of it. We'll only know in the revision mirror exactly where we are now, but we're definitely entering a new phase of it in 2025, hence my yearly forecast of the point of no return. And on that, the events will pick up the pace this year, and it's more reason to have this centeredness, this balance, this at least an ability to connect to this peace when we need to, this pure consciousness, this presence. And there's so much more to say on this topic, but we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for watching. We live in epic times.